"Excuse me, may I have a glass of water, please?" The request was soft, polite, almost unnoticed. But the response cut through the cabin like a blade. "You'll have to wait like everyone else. Don't cause a scene." Heads turned. Whispers began. And in that moment, what should have been a simple glass of water became something much larger. The line of passengers in the jet bridge moved slowly, the hum of engines faint in the distance. When Dr. Alicia Monroe stepped onto the aircraft, her presence carried quiet dignity. She wore a tailored blazer the color of deep emerald, carried only a slim leather tote, and walked with the ease of someone used to moving through airports and boardrooms alike. But even before she reached her seat, she felt it, the subtle shift in the air. The flight attendant at the door greeted the man in front of her with a wide smile and, "Welcome aboard, sir." When Alicia handed over her boarding pass, the smile faltered. A nod, curt and perfunctory, replaced the warmth. "Seat 12A. Left side." Inside the cabin, the difference was sharper. Passengers in her row glanced up, then quickly away, their expressions stiff, calculating. A woman clutching a designer bag slid it closer to her own lap as Alicia passed. A man in a navy suit pretended not to notice her, though his eyes lingered just long enough to make the message clear. "You don't belong here." She ignored it. She had long since mastered the art of walking through invisible walls. She found her seat by the window, placed her tote beneath, and sat with measured grace. The hum of chatter filled the cabin, polite laughter, business jargon, the clink of glasses. Yet Alicia felt the isolation sharpen, a circle of silence that seemed to form around her seat. The attendant passed again with pre-flight drinks, offering wine to the couple across the aisle and sparkling water to the man in front. When she reached Alicia, her tray angled slightly away, her voice flat. "Nothing for you?" Alicia's lips curved in the faintest smile. "Water will do, thank you." The attendant moved on without response. It was small, almost invisible. To most, it would seem like nothing. But to Alicia, it was the familiar beginning of something she knew too well. The flight hadn't even left the ground, and already the sky was showing its cracks. The cabin had settled into its rhythm. Laptops glowed, champagne glasses clinked softly, and the low murmur of business conversations floated through the air. From her window seat, Dr. Alicia Monroe gazed calmly at the clouds forming against the horizon, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When the flight attendant passed by again, Alicia lifted her hand politely. "Excuse me," she said, her tone warm, professional, unthreatening. "May I have a glass of water, please?" It was a simple request. The attendant stopped, one brow raised as though she'd been asked for something outrageous. Her voice sharpened, loud enough for the nearby rows to hear. "You'll have to wait like everyone else. Don't cause a scene." Heads turned. Conversations paused mid-sentence. The businessman across the aisle smirked into his glass, while the woman in 13B leaned forward, whispering something that earned a muffled laugh from her companion. Alicia blinked once, her expression unchanging. Her voice remained calm. "I wasn't trying to cause a scene. I just asked for water." The attendant's smile was thin, brittle. "Then you'll wait, ma'am. We don't give special treatment." That word, special treatment, landed like a gavel. It echoed in the hush that fell over the cabin, reframing a basic human request into something suspicious, entitled, undeserved. Passengers began to whisper. Some rolled their eyes. One man muttered under his breath, "Always complaining." Another chuckled softly, shaking his head. A phone tilted discreetly, recording. Alicia sat straighter, her posture poised, her silence louder than any protest. She didn't argue, didn't plead. She simply folded her hands again, her gaze steady, her dignity intact. But the damage was done. The water she had asked for had become irrelevant. What lingered instead was the accusation, the public shaming, the spectacle of a woman reduced to suspicion for daring to speak. The hum of the engines filled the silence. Around her, passengers shifted, pretending to return to their conversations, though their eyes betrayed their attention. And Alicia, framed by the oval of the window and the dim cabin light, looked out at the endless sky, not with defeat, but with a stillness that carried the weight of storms waiting to break. The murmurs in the cabin hadn't stopped. They had only grown quieter, sharper, like blades slipping between whispers. Every shift of an eye, every half-hidden smile seemed to circle back to Dr. Alicia Munro, as though her very presence had become an inconvenience. The flight attendant returned, this time with a supervisor trailing just behind. Her tone was clipped, rehearsed, carrying authority borrowed from procedure. "Ma'am, we've received complaints that you're being disruptive. If you can't follow instructions, we may have to take further action." Gasps stirred through the cabin. A man in 11C raised his phone higher, the red record light flashing. Another passenger muttered, "Here we go." Alicia didn't move. She didn't frown or raise her voice. Her composure was steady, carved from years of walking through storms like this. She folded her hands in her lap, her tone even and quiet. Yet it carried further than the attendant's sharpness. "I asked for water. Nothing more. I have followed every instruction given to me. If that is considered disruptive, then perhaps the disruption lies elsewhere." The supervisor blinked, caught off guard by the clarity of her words. But before he could respond, the attendant pressed on, eager to reassert control. "You need to lower your tone, ma'am. Other passengers are trying to rest." It was absurd. Alicia hadn't raised her voice at all, but the lie fed the narrative the cabin already wanted to believe. The whispers grew louder, the phone steadier. Still, she refused to bite. Her voice remained calm, deliberate. "My tone is measured. My request was simple. I will not be silenced because others are uncomfortable with my presence." The supervisor shifted uneasily. Authority seemed to leak from the situation, draining with every steady word she spoke. The passengers leaned in, waiting for confrontation, for outrage, for her to lose control. But Alicia gave them nothing. No spectacle. No rage. Only silence filled with dignity so unshakable it began to make others restless. For the first time, a passenger, an older man in 14D, spoke up. His voice cracked slightly, but it carried. "She hasn't done anything wrong. Let the woman be." The attendant stiffened, her authority faltering. The supervisor hesitated, caught between policy and the truth unfolding in front of him. Alicia turned her gaze to the window once more, her profile outlined against the pale light. Her calmness was not weakness. It was resistance, quiet, deliberate, powerful. And though the storm had not yet broken, the cabin was already beginning to shift. The tension in the cabin had become unbearable, strung so tight it felt as though the very walls of the aircraft might split. Phones glowed in every direction, recording the moment, hungry to catch the drama of a black woman being put in her place. The air smelled faintly of coffee, metal, and judgment. The supervisor finally squared his shoulders. "Ma'am, if you continue to disrupt the peace of this cabin, we'll have no choice but to remove you upon landing." The attendant stood just behind him, chin lifted, a small victorious smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. She believed the story had already been written, that Alicia Munro would be another headline, another viral clip confirming their worst prejudices. But Alicia didn't tremble. She didn't beg. She didn't fold into the corner society had tried to force her into 1,000 times before. She moved slowly, deliberately, as though she were the only one in control of time. Her leather handbag rested by her feet. With graceful precision, she reached down, opened it, and withdrew a slim black folder. The cabin went quieter, curious now, the energy shifting like a tide before a storm. She placed the folder on her tray table, her fingers brushing across the seal embossed in gold. The seal of the United States Department of Justice. A murmur rippled through the rows. Phones zoomed closer. The supervisor froze, his mouth half open, his practiced authority crumbling before the weight of that simple symbol. Alicia's voice was steady, low, but it carried like a bell through the cabin. I am Dr. Alicia Monroe, Federal Civil Rights Attorney, appointed to the Department of Justice. My work, for over 20 years, has been protecting citizens against the very behavior I've witnessed here. The words landed like thunder. The smugness drained from the attendant's face. The supervisor's hands twitched, unsure whether to clasp behind his back or fidget by his sides. The passengers shifted uneasily, their voyeuristic thrill melting into shame. Alicia continued, her tone unflinching. I asked for a glass of water. Nothing more. And yet, I was denied with contempt, accused of being disruptive, and threatened with removal. Not because of my actions, but because of your assumptions. The older man in 14D, who had spoken earlier, nodded firmly. Others lowered their phones, guilt flickering across their faces. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharp as glass. I have spent my career litigating cases just like this, systemic bias dressed up as protocol, discrimination disguised as policy. Let me be very clear, every second of this incident has been recorded. Every word you've spoken will be reviewed. And every witness in this cabin is now part of the record. The supervisor's voice faltered. Dr. Monroe, She raised a hand, silencing him. No. Don't apologize to me because you've been caught. Apologize to every person who has ever sat in this seat, or one like it, and been treated as less than human. The silence in the cabin was total. Even the engine seemed muted, as though the aircraft itself was listening. The smirk was gone from the attendant's face now, replaced with a flush of fear. The supervisor swallowed hard, shifting his weight like a child called to the principal's office. And Alicia? She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to shout. Her calm, unshakable authority had already rewritten the story. In that moment, she wasn't just a passenger. She was the storm. For a long breath, the cabin remained frozen. The supervisor shifted his weight, the flight attendant's face drained of color, and every passenger sat in the crosscurrent between shame and awe. Alicia Monroe did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words lingered in the recycled air, carrying a weight heavier than turbulence. Then, the first voice came. From row 14D, the older man who had spoken up before leaned forward, his voice steady this time. She's right. I saw everything. She asked politely for water. That's it. And you, he turned toward the attendant, treated her like she didn't belong here. Like she wasn't worthy of respect. Enough is enough. A younger woman across the aisle, in row 12B, raised her phone higher. Her live stream numbers ticked up fast, comments flooding the screen. The world's watching, she said softly, but firmly. And they're not on your side. The ripple began. One by one, passengers started speaking. I saw it too. She wasn't disruptive. This was discrimination, plain and simple. The flight attendant stammered, her earlier bravado unraveling. I didn't mean. Alicia lifted her hand gently, stopping the apology in its tracks. Intent does not erase impact, she said calmly. And systemic patterns are not accidents. They are choices. Choices repeated until they become normalized. What happened here isn't about me alone. It's about every person who has been silenced, dismissed, or humiliated in spaces they had every right to occupy. Her words struck something deeper than indignation. They carried truth. The businessman in 3A, who had earlier smirked at the scene, now lowered his phone, his face red with quiet shame. He muttered, "I was wrong," though not loud enough for most to hear. The supervisor's jaw worked as if chewing on words he couldn't swallow. His authority had collapsed in the face of a truth undeniable, and the eyes of dozens bore down on him, demanding accountability. Then came the sound no one expected: applause. It began in the back, a single pair of hands clapping, hesitant but strong. Then another, and another, until the cabin filled with the sound of passengers rising to their feet, not just physically, but morally, acknowledging the woman who had turned humiliation into a lesson and silence into a chorus. Alicia remained seated, calm, unshaken. But inside, her chest tightened with a surge of something rare, not just vindication, but hope. Hope that maybe, for once, the mirror of injustice had reflected back clearly enough for others to finally see. The supervisor bent his head slightly, voice breaking with something that sounded close to humility. "Dr. Monroe, on behalf of this airline, I deeply apologize. We failed you tonight. We failed our passengers. And we failed the values we claim to uphold." Alicia studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "An apology is a start. But what matters is what you do after. Change begins the moment you decide this can't happen again. Not to me. Not to anyone." The applause swelled louder, no longer hesitant but certain, carrying through the cabin like a tide breaking on shore. For the first time since boarding, Alicia allowed herself a small smile. It wasn't triumph. It was something deeper. It was justice finding its voice. The cabin, once poisoned by whispers of doubt, was now filled with the rhythm of clapping hands and the murmurs of agreement. Dozens of passengers, some recording, some simply bearing witness, had shifted from spectators to allies. The supervisor, visibly shaken, leaned down toward Alicia. His voice, stripped of its authority, trembled with sincerity. "Dr. Monroe, please, tell us how we can make this right." She looked at him for a long moment, then swept her gaze across the cabin. Every eye was on her, phones raised, the entire plane holding its breath. "Make it right," Alicia said, her voice calm but resolute. "You cannot erase the humiliation. You cannot take back the sting of assumptions. But you can ensure this moment matters. Not by pretending it never happened, but by committing that it will not happen again." Her words cut through the recycled air like truth-breaking chains. Passengers nodded. Some whispered yes, others simply stared, moved by her composure. Alicia reached into her leather bag, drawing out a slim folder. The supervisor blinked, confused. Inside were neatly prepared documents, training protocols, anti-bias strategies, legal precedents she had carried for her upcoming speaking engagement in Washington, D.C. She placed the folder gently on his tray. "This is what right looks like. Training. Awareness. Accountability. My work doesn't end when I land. It begins in moments like these. And tonight, you will not just remember me as the woman you tried to dismiss. You will remember me as the reason you chose to change." The supervisor swallowed hard, nodding, knowing the weight of the promise was now public, recorded, undeniable. From across the aisle, the older man in 14D spoke again, louder this time. "Ma'am, thank you for speaking when so many of us stay silent." And then another voice, the young woman in 12B, live streaming. The world is watching this right now. And I think they just saw how dignity looks when it stands tall. The cameras weren't weapons anymore. They were amplifiers of truth. The flight attendant, who had sparked the storm, finally broke into tears. She stammered apologies, but Alicia only gave her a steady look. "You will learn," she said softly. "And that will be your true apology." The captain's voice crackled through the intercom, unusually solemn. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. I want to extend my deepest apology on behalf of the crew. Dr. Monroe's words will be carried beyond this cabin. They will change how we move forward as an airline. And I thank every passenger here for standing with her tonight." The applause rose again, louder, no longer for spectacle but for solidarity. Alicia finally leaned back in her seat, her composure unbroken. Outside, the plane surged into the night sky, cutting through clouds, carrying not just travelers but a moment etched into memory. A reminder that dignity, when defended with calm strength, can shift the course of an entire institution. And though Alicia Monroe had not come to this flight seeking a stage, she had left it with something more lasting than outrage: change. Months passed. The flight itself became just one among thousands that crossed American skies that evening, but what happened inside it refused to fade. Clips of Dr. Alicia Monroe's calm defiance circulated across social media. Her words, "Intent does not erase impact," were quoted in news broadcasts, podcasts, and op-eds. Civil rights groups replayed her composure as an example of quiet strength in the face of systemic bias. The airline, under the weight of public scrutiny, announced sweeping reforms. Mandatory anti-bias training for all employees. New accountability procedures requiring supervisors to verify facts before acting. A passenger advocacy line, open 24/7, to report discrimination in real time. And they didn't stop there. Inspired by her work, the airline partnered with federal agencies and non-profit organizations to roll out a model of inclusive travel that would soon influence carriers across the country. In Washington, D.C., Alicia walked into a packed conference hall, invited not only as an attorney but as a living example of resilience. On stage, she was introduced not with titles or accolades, but with the story of that night at 30,000 feet, a night when one woman's refusal to bend reminded an entire system of its responsibility to rise. And when she spoke, her voice was steady, calm, just as it had been on the plane. What matters is not the turbulence we face in the skies of life, but the dignity with which we choose to navigate it. True change begins when silence ends. The crowd rose in applause, just as the passengers had that night, proof that echoes of dignity carry far beyond cabin walls. Dr. Alicia Monroe hadn't sought the spotlight. She had simply asked for water. But what she received was something greater, a platform to ensure that no one else would be treated as invisible in spaces they had every right to belong. And somewhere, high above the clouds, another flight crossed the night sky, carrying passengers who, because of her, would travel in a world just a little more awake and a little more human.